Hey folks, welcome to Moonshift Audio. I've always enjoyed DJ Seinfeld's output, and the lo-fi house thing over the last decade was great fun. But in recent releases, I feel like he's been kind of moving out of that box. And when it came to a recent hit, If You Like Me, I feel like he really smashed it. This track's got some of the imperfections and lo-fi charm of his early releases, but it's also got some huge emotional payoffs with the synth work in particular. So I decided to put this video together to show you how to make a track in a similar style. This week I'm looking at the production, but there's also a lot of interesting stuff going on in the mix, so I'm putting out a dedicated mix video next week. Here's a quick look at what we'll be making. Before we get stuck into this production, I just want to introduce myself quickly. My name's Jack. I'm a producer and a mix engineer based in the UK. I put out a new video every week, so please do like and subscribe. If you're interested in working with me on a track, or you'd like a bit of support with one of your own productions, you can get in touch at moonshiftaudio.com. But for now, let's take a look at this production. Okay, so here we are in the session. And I'm going to start off by looking at this lead Pluck sound, which is pretty much the driving force behind most of the track. This is a patch that I made in Serum. It's pretty straightforward. The first oscillator is a kind of squarish wave from the Roland Juno sampled oscillator shapes. And the second oscillator, which is an octave lower, is a saw wave. Quite a big amount of filter envelope there. And I've made this macro, which works on the filter cutoff, the sustain and release of the amp envelope and of the filter envelope. And what that means is you get quite a lot of control of the kind of intensity of the sound. And by doing some quite kind of involved automation of that control, we can get this really nice building kind of emotional intensity with the track. I've actually got a recent video where I made a patch that's similar to this, where I go in detail into how to make a patch like this in Serum. So I'm not going to get really stuck into the actual kind of synth programming, but I'll put a link to that video in the description so you can check that out if you want to. Notes wise, I'm basically playing the F, which is our root note, all the way through, and this kind of rhythmic, it's mostly a kind of triplet based rhythm, you'll hear that now, and I'm playing these kind of seventh intervals that then change over that root note. And if I now turn on the automation, you'll see that I've kept that control basically at 0 through the first couple of bars. And then we start to bring in the automation with a simple rise. I might make that slightly more curved for the second 8 bars. Just added a little flourish at the end with a high octave. And now we're really into the kind of automated section, and you can hear and hopefully feel that emotional intensity that just automating that one control can give us. Got a riser here that I got off of Splice, really simple white noise based riser. And now we're into the vocals. Just going to quickly show you this impact. This track really doesn't have a lot of sort of low end energy. It's actually very, very bright. In If You Like Me, it's quite an unusual frequency balance for a sort of dance track. It's all about the high end energy, and the kick drum and the sub bass are really quite reserved. So I chose a impact sound. It's basically a clap with a big reverb. Didn't want something like a kick bomb because it just wouldn't have fitted with that same aesthetic. Vocals wise, we've got Splice's finest. And to be honest, I'm not over the moon about these samples, but it was good enough for this tutorial. I really like the vocal in If You Like Me. It's just a little bit weird, a little bit unusual, and particularly the spoken words with this crazy modulation on them really, really work. But I couldn't find anything really like that on Splice, so we've got this. So I've just turned off all the processing and the send so you can hear that as a raw vocal.
Fading lights coming down.
Turn on Little Altar Boy.
Fading lights coming down. Fading lights coming down. Fading lights.
Then vocal synth from Isotope.
Fading lights coming down.
Really roughing that up quite a lot. And then a decapitator just to really help that cut through the mix even more. Then we've got this kind of response, which sounds like this. I'll just turn off these as well.
So we gave it a good run.
Formatting that down and putting a bit of drive on with Little Altar Boy. Polyvox from Vocal Synth. Vibrato, this is a really simple tempo synced. If I increase that, just wanted a little bit. This is a nod to the DJ Seinfeld track really, and then a bit of EQ just to take the lows out of that. Now, I wanted to make this kind of response a bit sort of spaced out and reverby, and I tried sending it to a reverb, but what I actually realised is that I wanted a bit more control over the reverb independently. So I've just copied the track, put a reverb on at 100% wet, and that sounds like this. Got the same exact Little Altar Boy, but quite an aggressive EQ to take out all the lows and a bit of the kind of harshness. And then that reverb and the dry vox go to this group where I'm distorting them both together. Which is roughing up that reverb no end, giving it a bit more presence to sit in the track. And now we've got this call and response vocal.
Feel the night, all the sounds. Lights coming down.
While we're looking at the vocal, I've chopped this little bit out of the response vocal and thrown that through a fairly comprehensive chain of processing. So, Little Altar Boy, pitching that down by an octave. Chorus, just add some really nice depth and modulation. Greenhouse, with the sort of delayed left and right and a little bit of saturation just to throw that out to the sides. Then you'll know if you've watched some of my other videos, I love this Moog filter from UAD. And I'm automating the cutoff on that just to slowly build, give that an opening, rising feeling throughout that intro. And now I'm just taking out a little bit of the mud there and rolling off the lows. And last up, kickstart at about 80% mix, just to give it a little bit of move, a little bit of groove. And that'll just sit in the back of the track, leading into the vocal there. At this point, we developed that pluck sound a little bit, just starting to add triads. And when we get into the drop of the track, you'll see it's just going a bit higher on the notes. And while we're here, I'm just going to take a look at the automation on this, because you really can do a lot by programming these. Now, it's worth mentioning that the snap through all of this is a fairly swung. It's a 16th with a 23% swing, and that's what's giving you that nice kind of that sort of like slightly juddery kind of vibe. So for this automation, I set the quantize here on that same snapping. And what that's allowed me to do is to draw automation that lasts exactly for the same duration as the notes. And you can get these really nice little bumps in the intensity of that macro. Little ramps up like that can be really nice. And I'm also doing some automation on the sends, which we can take a look at now. So this pluck sound is going to a delay, which I'm using Baby Comeback for its ducking effect, so that delay is ducking out the way when the actual pluck is there. And I'm also pumping the delay only with a kickstart. And I'm doing the same trick on the reverb. That's without the verb. Just adds a little bit of depth. And subtle little additions like this. So we're using a kickstart on the reverb, on the delay, and actually on the sound itself, but not very much, only at a 41% mix. If I bypass that. It's not actually very noticeable, but it does help the track to groove. At the drop here, I've also brought in a duplicate of that same pluck sound, only this is just a super simple square wave, quite hollow sounding, played an octave lower, and we're just playing those kind of interval notes. We're leaving the root note of F out of that. It's quite low in the mix. Just helps to give you a little bit of depth down there. So that's pretty much what's going on. I'm going to look at the processing on this pluck sound and all of the other mixing in next week's video, where I'll be going through the whole mix down of this track. But for now, I'm going to take a quick look at the drums. And although we had some drums going on in the intro, those are effectively a sort of manipulated version of this main drum section. So I figured I'd show you that first. I pulled in a selection of different sounds for this. Some of them were from techno packs, and some of them were from kind of garagey kind of packs. And I ended up going with this techno kind of kick drum, and I'm using Trash. I love this LoFi beat preset. You want to hear that dry? Yeah, it's really sucking some of the lows out of that, which is exactly what we want for this quite kind of clicky, bass light, kind of poppy balance that we've got on this track. And you'll hear every fourth kick is a slightly different sample. It comes out through the same channel, so it's getting that same Trash and this same EQ applied to it, which we'll look at properly in the mixdown video next week. But just having a little bit of variation in that kick. It's just a subtle way to add some interest to the track. Snare wise, if I turn off all the processing, this is a kind of garage type snare. It's got a big hi-hat on the top of it, and we're doing a lot here. We're using that same lo-fi beat preset from the trash to smash that up a bit. And then we've got some other processing which we'll look at in the mix video, but really kind of making that quite knocky and lo-fi. I've also got another snare sound which is very quiet, and I'm using it for ghost snares. So if we pull this up, and again, this is at that 23% swung, and it just really helps to keep things grooving. This hi-hat is pretty simple. It's quite aggressive. You can see I've shortened that just to make it really snappy. Couple of other bits and pieces. Got a hat on the left, and a 16th note hat, which is down in the center, quite low in the mix. And then something I really like is this tambourine, which is quite a prominent part of the beat in If You Like Me. It's panned over to the right. And I'm just using skaka for this, which is an instrument I love for any kind of top line percussion. You can see all I've done here is just drawn the C sharp note. But you get some good control here. So you can change the duration. So I've made this really snappy. And you've also got this humanized control. You can change what this is actually doing. But I've pushed that up just to make it really quite loose, which adds a bit of kind of humanity, humanized control. But yeah, it just adds a little bit of kind of natural fallibility to the track. We take that out. Really is adding a lot of energy to the track. We've also got some synthesized percussion going on here. Now, I really like the flavor of the noise that you get from Diva. So you can see here, I've turned off the oscillators, like the main oscillators. The sub is all the way down. So all this is doing is noise. There's a Kickstarter on there and quite a lot of processing to rough it up. If I was to turn this all off, it's literally just noise, but it's got a nice kind of analog feel to it. And I'm using this just to add these little stabs of noise. Which in the context of the beat, it's just another element to keep things moving. I pulled a similar trick with a kind of noise-based crash. So it's almost the same patch, but this time I've got a filter envelope. So we get that kind of... I've panned these left and right. They're exactly the same sound. And I've automated the cutoff to rise, and we get this kind of like building fill. And I've also got another noise patch. This one's from Serum. And that's just mirroring this open hat. It's panned a bit to one side. And I've just got these little ramps up on the release of that amp envelope just to kind of give it that decay when we get to the end of a 16 or an 8 in this case. There's a bit of processing going on the drum bus, but we're going to leave that for now and take a look at the drums in the intro. So for the intro, I wanted it all to be like really, really clipped and sort of stuttery. So I just copied everything. And what I've done, particularly on the main section of drums, is gone into battery and shortened the decay on everything. And then what I've done is gone into the bus which these are going to, and I've put a filter on just to take out some of that low end, basically. So the difference between the drums in the intro and then in the main body of the track, but we still get the groove even with it all clipped like that in the intro. So we've taken a look at the drums, the main sort of lead pluck sound, and the vocals, so it's probably a good time to look at the bass. Now, as I mentioned before, the bass is not particularly prominent in our reference, If You Like Me, and so we didn't have to work too hard on this, but I've got a classic kind of like sine wave with a triangle wave an octave above it for the main kind of sub bass. That's coming up and down with a kickstart, just to keep it out the way of the kick. And then we've got the high side of the bass. Just going to turn off the kickstart on this. So I've got two versions of this patch in Serum. One of them's got a kind of nice, slow ramp up on the filter, just to kind of let through some of those highs after a quarter of a beat. And the other one is the same patch, again, literally just a saw wave. But with a much more sort of wobbly modulation on that filter. And we go back and forth between them. Layer that with the sub bass. Those two synths are being fed to this same group, so I can process them together. Now with the kickstart on, it sounds a bit weird if we don't have the drums in. But if I bring the drums in, you can feel how that's kind of grooving. And in the mix, you can hear just how far back that is. It's really just a very subtle extra bit of texture. And so now we're getting into the second kind of section, and we bring in this detuned lead sound. Nothing too crazy going on here. We've got a kind of super saw here with a seventh below as another oscillator. Reasonable amount going on. We're using RC20 to add some kind of pitch, wobble and distortion. If you want to hear that completely dry as it comes out of Serum. Widening, pumping, And there's a bit of side chaining going on that we'll look at next week. Playing this nice kind of ascending line here. And at this point, we've really got most of the elements of the track in place. It's just a question of kind of rearranging them, bringing a few bits in and out to give us our dropout and then the second drop. So at this point, I brought back that nice filtered vox, just to give a little bit of a build behind that lead sound. There with those noise cymbals. And we've pulled that macro right back. We've also done a separate automation on the filter itself. Which is a neat way of kind of lowering the overall energy behind this second layer of automation with the macro there. At this point, on those intro drums, I've turned on a Echo Boy and a filter, just to give a little bit of a build and energy there. So I've also brought back that kind of detuned lead, and this time I'm filtering it, and I've also dropped a reverb onto it just to send it right to the back. So if we listen to the original version, and now this one, see, it's way in the background, soaked in reverb. That's fully wet. And then I pull the mix back, and it becomes a bit more present. And then we send it to the back again. And that reverb mix is getting pulled down, just so it gains a bit of clarity as we build into the second drop. Filtered vocals back in. And all of the other elements we've already seen. So now we've just dropped out the drums to bass. We're left with just our main Pluck sound and our filtered vocal. And that's our track. That's it for this week, but please do like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, resources and downloads from me at Moonshift Audio. Till next time.